Hi guys, it's Kelly and I am back with another video for Neat and Tangled. Today we are going to be talking about a watercolor technique, and so I'm using the Awesome set and then also the Calthea, which is all the leaves. It's great for fall coming up, even though it pains me to say fall is coming up. I'm working on Canson watercolor paper and I'm going to go ahead and tape that down. Before we get totally into the video, just in case you happen to be working on like last minute time, there is a Labor Day sale going on over at the Neat and Tangled store. It's 20% off everything except August release products, and that is going on through September 3rd at 11:59. So what you saw there was the ink. Oh Lord, what the heck's that? Ink on. I always think I'm saying it wrong. Ink on 3. And it is the fade out, no line coloring. And I just purchased this, and it's the first time I'm trying it, and I was very excited. I'm also using Hero Arts liquid watercolors. That's what you see me dropping in there. And then they don't have an orange out yet. A little birdie told me there might be one coming though. And so I just mixed the strawberry, and I think it's called like daffodil or dandelion or something. The yellow and the red people. That's what I mixed. Also, this is the first time I've used the dark teal color. And I sat there in awe of it for probably like a good 10 seconds. That's why you saw my paintbrush freeze. Like, ooh, I like this so much. It's so pretty. Basically, when you're doing negative painting, which is what we're talking about, you want to do a base layer of color. I totally got like crazy out of control with my base layer of color because I just love colors. If I had to do this all over again. Now remember, I never do anything. I never do them twice. So I'm learning with you guys. If I had to do it all over again, I would stick to a more simple color palette, and I would definitely do less colors on my first layer of color. You also, watercolors always dry lighter than what they look when they're wet, so you want to make sure that you make the background dark enough that when it lightens up, there's still some color there. I'm going to sop up all of the extra water with just a paper towel, and then I'm going to go ahead and dry this. Now, I have seen negative painting before. If you ever took Dawn Woolslagel's class in online card classes, the watercolor, she talks about negative painting in there. And I recently watched a super cool video, and I will link it below, about negative painting, and it was super helpful. Her painting came out totally beautiful, completely different than mine. But so you can see, I started stamping with the fade out first. You guys saw me do that. Where I stamped them, you can see the outline of them here in the background. There's one in the bottom left and one in the top right. I wish I had done more of that. I wish I would have done the first layer of stamping while the paper was white. I didn't realize I was still going to be able to see it after I put the first layer of color over it. So I wish I had done that, because the benefit of the fade out ink is that it takes on the color of whatever you're using. And it is acid free, archival, waterproof, fast drying, all of those, all of those things that we love about inks. I would definitely like to try this with Copics and then with colored pencils, but I decided to try it with watercolor here first. So when you're doing negative painting, you stamp down your items, and then you, instead of painting the item, you paint around it. That's why that's where it gets its name. And you can build up like a crazy cool design, because each time, so you can see how much I'm watering down. I think this is the moss color. Like I'm watering it down on the side so that it's super light, because we're just going to keep doing this. I didn't completely cover my background with leaves. I just did, like 3 or 4, and then I paint around them, and then also fill in that rest of that negative area. So I'm building up that pigment and laying down different colors. They're all working, differently together. I will tell you that a lot of them I was just eyeballing because I couldn't really see the ink. In the video that I watched, she just hand painted her leaves. Like she sketched them in and painted them. I obviously wanted to use stamps to be able to do that. And so for a lot of them, I couldn't really tell where it began and where it ended. What I learned as I went is that because it takes on the color of pigment that you're putting on top of it, it's a lot easier to see if you just put like a light layer of color over it. And then if that's too dark for what, that the whole point is us building up pigments. So if that's too dark, you can blot it up with a paper towel, but it will still grip that ink and you can see it much, much better. So I would stamp it first, do a light layer of ink over it, and then blot that up so you can see where the actual stamp is stamped. Because what you're going to see here is I start to outline this one, and I feel like, why is this leaf so huge? There's no way it's this big. I'm definitely messing it up. And so I make it a smaller leaf. But it actually was that big, guys. Yeah, and you'll be able to see the lines later. That'll be super fun when we get to that part. But anyway, just working through this, I did speed up after this first layer here that you see me putting down. I did speed up the video because this whole thing probably took me about, I don't know, I want to say maybe an hour, hour and a half. I wasn't like watching the clock completely, but it was a little bit time consuming as watercolor tends to be. But I think that the end result is cool. It's very different from my normal style. And this is one of those cards that photographed better than it looks in real life. Sometimes that happens, like when you're doing photography and sometimes you have a beautiful card that you go to photograph it and it looks awful and there's just no way to make the lighting right or this or that or what have you. And there's other times where maybe you don't totally love the card in real life, but then you take a picture of it and you're like, wow, that photograph's so good. This was one of those things where I was like, it's a little bit dull. And that's just not, there's nothing wrong with that. Let me emphasize that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just my own personal preference for bright colors, which is why I struggle sometimes with watercolor because they are more muted. But anyway, so just going through, and because I couldn't really see, I decided to start doing them one at a time. So I would stamp the leaf so I would have an idea of exactly where I put it and then put the pigment down. Again, could have saved myself this whole heartache because as you'll be able to see here soon, as they grip that pigment, then you can really see the line. Like look at that one on the right. That's kind of like overlapping the tape. You can totally see it. And the same thing with this one on the left. And that's when I realized that you would still be able to see the ink. I wanted some of them to be tucked behind other ones. I was super lazy and just wiped it off with my finger. That seemed to work okay for me. You could also like mask with a Post-it note or something. It doesn't have to be perfect because ultimately they're going to be very kind of organic leaves. So each time you're building up the layers, you're building up darker color so that the ones you did first are going to stand out and they're going to be in the forefront. And the ones you do later will be more in the background. This dark teal color is like life. I mean, it's so pretty. It's so pretty. I just love it. So let me tell you about my evening. So I came home from work. I walk into the back door. My little puppy is there to greet me. I call her little puppy. She's like a 70-pound boxer lab mastiff mix. She's not a little puppy, but she's my little puppy. And I turn around to shut the door behind me, and there is no joke, a frog in my house. There's a frog in my house just chilling on my door frame. It's a tree frog. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this frog? Like, come on now. There's a frog. Like, I've had spiders. I've had crickets. I've had a spider that had babies in my laundry room. I have had very large mosquitoes. Very, very large mosquitoes. I have had stink bugs. I have had just like you name it, it's been in the house. And now now I have a frog in my house. And I have no idea how the frog got in the house. I mean, no clue. I have no idea how long he's been chilling there. I feel like he wasn't there when I left for work. I think I would have noticed if the frog was there when I left for work. But nonetheless, he got put into a little box top or whatever and released back out into the wild. And in fact, I shared it on Instagram if you follow me over there. And one of my followers commented, "You have had a lot of wildlife in your house lately." And that is true. There has been a lot of wildlife in my house lately, and I am over it. So while I was sitting here, I had painted the whole card in my craft room, hanging out, whatever. I was sitting here editing this video. And as I was sitting here editing this video, this I don't know, maybe nickel-sized black spider comes crawling down the wall right in front of me. Like, why? I don't understand. So he comes down the wall and he's a very fast mover. Um, I wasn't fast enough and he got lost. He got lost, and then the entire craft room had to be gone through because I was positive I would just be sitting here doing it. And honestly, I'm not even completely sure that as I sit here right now, that this thing won't pop back up and just make me scream bloody murder into the microphone. It's a possibility. Keep your fingers crossed that doesn't happen. Because I'm so over it. I'm so over the spiders. I killed one in my kitchen yesterday afternoon. It was just crawling across the floor doing its thing. Killed that one. And I know some of you guys are like, they're harmless. They eat things. Leave them alone. Evict them from the house. No need to murder them. Listen, I understand. And I think that it is wonderful that you want to set them free out into the world and wherever you live. As long as you don't live where I live, you do you, boo. That's fine. But if they come up in my house, they have to die. So now I have gotten basically an escapee that's just roaming around my craft room somewhere, and I'm not a big fan of it. So back to this card. I'm to the darkest layer. I thought I owned black liquid watercolors from Hero Arts. I don't, so I just mixed up a super dark teal color by adding some purple into it and what is it, deep ocean? I think it's deep ocean. So I added some blue and added some purple in the hope that it would make it darker. It did make it a little bit darker. And then I just did very quick outlines of some veins in the leaves. This isn't anything that is realism for sure. So originally I was like, meh, I don't know how much I love it. And then I flipped it upside down. It's so funny how your perspective can change things, right? And then I was like, oh, they look like falling leaves now. I like them so much better. I like them so much better. So I'm going to emboss the sentiment this awesome part of it right onto the watercolor paper, which you can see I've cut down. Make sure your watercolor is completely dry. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, Kelly, why would you stamp on wet paper? My paper was not wet. What I mean by completely dry is make sure there's no tacky areas. So even though I treated it with the anti-static tool, there were still some areas that were still kind of tacky when I put on the embossing powder. And then I was immediately sad. You'll see it. There's only like 2 or 3 spots on the bottom right-hand side. And I really had to go in there and kind of like dust off. The one section was, I kind of had to like really go back and forth. And then a trick I learned from Laura Bassin, which is amazing. Definitely do this. I used my Tim Holtz, like the pick tool, the needle tool, to go in there and clean up the areas that were really close together, like the really teeny tiny areas that you would have a hard time getting a paintbrush in. This works delightful for it. So I just go in there and kind of move them either back to their home or scrape them off. And then I went ahead and heat set that. I'm also going to do the heat embossing for the other part of the sentiment. I'm just going to do it on some Black Simon Says Stamp cardstock. And so this says, "You are so awesome." I'm feeling encouragement cards lately, guys. I don't know if it's just a spot I'm in my life where I just feel like I just want to tell everybody, like, you're enough and you can do it, and don't second guess yourself, and be brave and make good decisions, and you're going to be fine. It's going to be good. You can only grow from it, whatever it is, whatever the thing is. So anyway, back to this. So I went ahead and heat set that. This one I didn't have any issues with because nothing was damp or sticky or any of the things that I talked about before. Did use that little needle tool trick again. That Laura, she's so smart. She's such a smart cookie. And then, heat set that. I always have my heat gun heating up beforehand, just so that the paper doesn't warp. I busted out my white fun foam that I haven't used in ages, and cut that down to be slightly smaller than my card panel because I knew I was just going to keep it super simple and just pop it up over some white cardstock. So I wanted it to be actually popped up. I thought that would add a little bit of interest to it. This is something that I think would be I don't know, the whole technique, it was really fun to try. I learned a lot of things that if I did it again, which I'm sure I probably will, that I would do, like I said, would do differently. I popped up the You Are So on some foam tape, and then I added some clear sequins from the clear sequin mix from Neat and Tangled. And then that's pretty much the card. That's all I did to it. Oh, I always add my glossy accents. That's fact, because I just feel like it makes them stay on there better. And then that's it. So thank you guys so much for joining me. Don't forget about that sale. You only have until 11:59 on Monday evening after Labor Day to get those. It's everything in the store except the August release. So that will be linked below. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.